So Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens is almost here. In a few days, the anime will make its triumphant return. And you know what? I'm excited. I'm interested. There seems to be just something about this Yu-Gi-Oh! That's giving me that feel that there's something interesting here. Something interesting will happen here. I don't know if it's because of this existential plot it's trying to sell us on. I don't know if it's the new art style kind of makes it feel like a fresh start. I don't know if it's just wondering what they'll do with such young characters. But you know what? I genuinely am interested in where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going. That being said, I said this about Vrains, and we all saw where that wound up. But yeah, no, so I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about what I'm hoping for with this show, what my expectations are, and what I think it needs to do to succeed. And now that being said, these are not in any real particular order, because we're not going to know what the show really needs to do till it gets started. The show will tell us what it needs, but for right now, these are the things that I think will most likely have to be done right if the show wants to be good. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 10. So this one is actually at the bottom of the list because I think it's the one we need to least worry about, but I still think it needs to be addressed, and that is, use the age of the character effectively. Yuta is our youngest protagonist ever at 11, and a lot of people are turned off by that, but I would argue that no, whatever the story needs, the characters should be. And if the story requires a younger child, then you can do a lot with that. Like, how do kids process information? How do they learn about the world? How do they deal with plot? How do they deal with the other characters? All of these can be very important factors when factoring the age of the character in, and for the most part, Yu-Gi-Oh's done a very good job with this. The younger protagonists felt like they were in stories that required younger protagonists, and the older ones were in stories that felt like they needed older ones. This is a thing Yu-Gi-Oh has always done very well, and I'm expecting them to do it right again. And we already got a bit of a preview with that in that sort of episode 1 teaser they put out, where Yuga's just imagining himself with a giant robot full of people. That feels like a thing an 11-year-old would think. So I am excited. I do think they'll get this right, but still needed to be addressed. Number 9, make his deck memorable. So yeah, one problem I've had with the last two protagonists is I don't remember anything about their decks. Now yes, I remember Yuya used Performer Pals and Yusaku used Cyburst, but I don't really remember what their strategies were. I don't really remember what any of their cards do. And if you take a few minutes to go onto the wiki and look at all the different Cybursts and Performer Pals, you'll find that they kind of do nothing. The Performer Pals are the worst of the two because there's so many of them that are just completely useless, and their designs are just all over the place and lack any sense of cohesion. But the Cybursts are a close second. They made so many of them just as pack filler. And it was just to the point where I just don't care about any of them. I want to care about Yuga's deck in the same way I cared about the first four protagonists. When they used monsters I liked. When they did stuff that made sense and was interesting and had strategy to it because we knew what their usual cards were, what their go-to guys were. Whereas with the last two, it feels just more like if they used a good card and if a card wound up being relevant in real life, it was more by accident than anything else. And that's a bad thing. Number 8, don't screw the girl up. So the last two Yu-Gi-Ohs have had this problem of both girl protagonists have very interesting backstories and plot relevance and this general feeling like they want the girls to be important. Then they fuck it up. Yeah, Aoi has it the worst of the two because they constantly built her up and gave her interesting plot points, and we all thought this was going to lead to interesting character interactions, and every single time they just completely dropped the ball on it. Yuzu maybe has it worse, though, because she was almost the protagonist for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, but then they just kind of put her on the back burner so that way Yuya could run the story, and we all saw how that wound up. So yeah, you have a bit of an interesting concept here with a girl who looks somewhat goth-inspired, so I think you could do some interesting things with that if that is a plot point. But most importantly, if you're going to do something with her, just do it! Number 7, don't be afraid to have moments of just character. Like, one thing I always really liked about the Yu-Gi-Ohs was they always established personality. They always established character interactions. They always established why this person likes this person, why they don't like this person, what they think about this person. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains didn't want to really do any of that. I never felt like we had those moments of the people just being people and you just caring about the characters because you care about the characters and you want to learn about them. The show didn't have that confidence that it would just keep you invested just because you like these people. So they just kind of always focused on plot and just kind of being like, character does this, character does that. But I want to care about them as people. When the dust settles and your show is over, people will remember the characters who felt the most like, well, people. And that's what we want, and that's what makes them important, and that's what makes them memorable, and that's what we'll come back to years later when we're remembering your show. Number 6, don't make the plot feel like something that's just there to give us episode after episode. Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, and, well, all the Yu-Gi-Ohs have this problem of it feels like they just make episodes to keep making episodes, because they think if the show goes away, you won't come back. That's why a lot of shows have to have such high episode counts. It's not really based around quality or the story they're trying to tell. It's just based around the fact that they feel like they need to constantly remind you it exists. And I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel like my plot is designed to be dragged out for 50 plus episodes a year. I want to feel like whatever story I'm hearing just is flowing naturally and flowing organically. Unfortunately, that's hard to do when your show has to be so goddamn long. But I think there is a balance you can strike, and that balance needs to just be more than we're going to have a 10-minute conversation that isn't interesting, or do recap episodes, or make one turn be 10 minutes long. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Can flow right. It just needs to do that. Number 5, make the duels memorable. I don't want any more of this Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. I brought a new monster out of my ass every 5 minutes that we got. Now, yes, when you look at all the Yu-Gi-Ohs, and when you just look at shonens in general, a lot of times it's, here's my new super cool weapon that just came out of nowhere. That's a common thing, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't need to do that. This is a card game. I am supposed to feel a sense of strategy and intelligence from characters. I didn't feel that out of the last guy, and I talked about it to death, but I do think you can get it right this time if the concept is we're watching Yuga learn to become a good duelist. Like if we're seeing him grow and develop. That's why Yuma works. That's why Yugi worked. Little Yugi, not Yami Yugi. You felt like you were on a journey with these people, and their duels are supposed to be representative of that. So make me feel like I'm getting their intelligence while they learn and while they grow, and just make the duels interesting. Number 4, please make the villains interesting. Now this one is less a Yu-Gi-Oh! Problem and more just a general problem when your villains are this big faceless organization. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, well, they're just a big organization, so they just do big organization stuff. It's a very common problem in fiction, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, unfortunately, fallen for this in the past. Dr. Akaba, Dr. Faker, villains where it's just sort of like they have an interesting profile, but then they just sort of falter and not really do anything and then just get pushed to the side. I want to feel like this organization has something to it than just being like a bully to the protagonist. I want to feel like there's something more to it, something interesting, something unique about it, something that makes me want to be afraid of them or sympathize and understand them. Yu-Gi-Oh!, as we all know, is very good with villains, and I hope it continues. I just don't want them to fall into the usual trap you always see with this. Number 3, please just do some good stuff with the animation. So yeah, Yugioh Sevens has a new art style, and not everyone is on board. And it's understandable, because it looks very much like what is common in a lot of kids' anime. Now, in its defense, it's at least different for Yu-Gi-Oh! And they do seem to, in the marketing, be playing up what is different about this show than other anime of similar nature. But the visuals still need to do their job. Now, we've seen that the character designs do a good job of showing off the personality, but I also need to feel it in just the general visuals. Rather it's we end up going surreal, or we end up going kind of dark and gothic, or any sort of different thing that Yu-Gi-Oh tends to do, I need to see it, because simply put, this is still a visual medium, and said visuals are kind of fucking important. So, yeah. New art style does not have to be a bad thing if they're willing to go and do some interesting stuff with it, but we'll have to wait and see. Number 2, acting's gotta be on point. So yeah, like I keep bringing up, we have a much more existential thing going on with this show with the concept of the government organization, which presumably means if the script is any good, means that the characters will at some point have to say existential stuff. They'll have to say complicated stuff. And I need the actors to be good with that. We haven't heard a lot of dialogue from anybody, and maybe that can be worrisome. It could also just mean that they're trying to be vague. But the guy playing Yuga seems to be pretty alright. He's about the only one we've heard. But his only real dialogue has just made him seem like typical over-eager hothead. Which doesn't have to be a bad thing. It depends on how they do with it. But I need the acting to really sell it. Usually Yu-Gi-Oh! Acting, I think, is a little bit better than a lot of its shonen and toy commercial equivalents. So that's usually a good sign. I mean, look, the guy who played Yusaku had, like, no real experience, but I think he did a pretty damn good job. So I'm really hoping high on this one, and I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Will deliver on the acting. And the number one most important thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens, this isn't actually that much more important because they were all about the same relevancy, make the rival good. So, we see a lot of the blue-haired kid in promotion. God, I hope this is a misdirect and he's not the main rival. He seems way too much in the best friend sidekick role. And the rival is, in most people's eyes, the most important thing about any Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. So, they've gotta get the rival right. I want someone who is intelligent, I want someone who is intimidating, and yes, you can pull this off with an 11-year-old character. But most importantly, I want to feel like they are our protagonist's ideological opposite. I want to feel that sort of push and pull between the two of them. I want to feel like when they are in the room together, it means something. It's important. This is something they pulled off very well with Yusaku and Revolver. Whenever the two were in the room, I genuinely felt it. I genuinely cared. And I want that to continue on. I want someone who challenges Yuga. I want someone who feels like a threat. Someone who feels powerful. But I also want someone who has a character of their own, an identity of their own. They're not just the rival. I want someone important. I want someone relevant. And even though I think I will like this blue-haired kid, he's not really who I want out of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Rivals. And I hope to get a Yu-Gi-Oh! Rival who is just as badass and memorable as the amazing characters who have preceded them. So yeah, this is my list. I personally believe it's pretty fair. But give me your thoughts on Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens below, what you're looking forward to, what you're excited to, and join us Saturday when it is once again time to return to reviewing Yu-Gi-Oh! Episodes.